Hello, so this is Marvin McKenzie. Just wanted to make a quick broadcast, kind of Washington State history and growing up in the state of Washington, some things that are interesting on Columbia River. Kind of a theme of mine whenever I think about the state of Washington. Actually, what you're looking at right now is a picture that I took back in about 1999. This picture is taken from my grandparents' house in just outside of Lyle, Washington. And what you're looking at, the island out there, is called Memaloose Island. I grew up looking at Memaloose Island, and when I go to my grandpa and grandma's house, this is what I'd be looking at. Grandpa had this was all an alfalfa farm at one time, and grew over it. You can't see it in this picture. This is one of the very earliest digital cameras, and the detail wasn't super great. Mount Hood is on the other side of the river as well, and you just can't see it because of the way the mountain is sitting there. But this is the view that I had look at from my grandpa and grandma's house back in those years. And of Memaloose Island. Memaloose Island is very interesting history there of this island. It was an Indian burial ground. Lewis and Clark even wrote of it, put it in their journals. They knew that it existed as an Indian burial ground and said so. They called it Sepulchre Island, I think. And so that was, I wanted to show this. So there was, that picture was from Grandma's house, looking at Memaloose Island. This is on the other side of the river from the Memaloose rest area there. And this place right here where the little white, that's my grandparents' place where they lived all of those years, had that farm there. It all got changed. This is a new picture of it. My grandpa died a lot of years ago, and my grandma died in 2007. And by the time she passed away, my grandparents had sold the property to a developer, a speculator, and they had done a situation where they'd sold the property, but the guy had agreed that they could live in it for the remainder of their lives. I don't think he expected that they'd live as long as they did. So Grandma died in 2007. At that time, the property went. The speculator, I think, was a developer, but he didn't ever develop it. It turned into instead part of a national scenic type of a thing. And so when Grandma and Grandpa died, when my grandmother died, they took the property and actually destroyed their house and turned it back to nature. If you look, that's where their place used to be. It's no longer there. It's gone now. In fact, I've been there to see it. You can't even tell that my grandparents' home ever was there. They removed all of Grandpa and Grandma's orchard trees. All of those were removed and turned it back to as close to looking like nature as they possibly could. I remember growing up, I would sit at my grandma's house and I'll get that picture back up. I'd sit out at my grandma's house, the living room. You'd be looking at out this window. This is the view out of my grandmother's living room window. And I remember many, many days my grandma would get up before daylight almost every day of her life. I remember many, many mornings getting up and seeing her up, just looking out that window across the river, and she would just stare out there. And then they had telescopes and so forth so that we could take closer looks at Memaloose Island. And as kids, we would just spend lots and lots of time just studying the island from Grandma's living room and looking out there and just seeing the property and all of that. So when Grandpa and Grandma passed away, growing up, one of the things that was interesting growing up is they would always talk about out here on Memaloose Island how it was this burial ground, and how at one time in history people would like do grave robbing. So here's a picture. They had told me about the skulls and the graves that were out there on Memaloose Island. They told me all about it. And so here's a picture out there on the island and out there. And out on my grandparents' property, we'd look out here and Grandpa and Grandma had just collections, mounds almost of arrowheads that they'd collected out of their fields. These fields were all alfalfa fields when I was growing up. And by the time this picture was taken, Grandpa was gone, and they no longer farmed it. but this is all alfalfa fields, and so there were tons and tons of arrowheads that get out of here. You can't see it in this picture, but over to the right hand side of the picture, go the property to the edge, and Grandpa and Grandma's property. There was a little creek called Major Creek that run through their property, and a canyon that kind of was there with Major Creek, and there was an old. It was like an Indian. Almost a fortress where they had built up rocks, and they'd made a spot where they could stay inside this rock fortress they built and look over the Columbia River. And so people had, I mean, there were pots in there from ancient pots and all of that, but lots and lots of arrowheads and those kinds of things that they get off of that property. And so again, this river has just been a part of my family's history, not just a little part, but a major part of my family's history for as long as I can remember. The only thing left now is there's a small park just a little ways away from Grandpa and Grandma's property, and they've got a bench there with my grandfather's name on the bench. And that is the last memory of our family even being there on this overlooking the Memaloose Island. That's the last memory that there is of any family member even being there at this time. So I just thought I would share some family pictures and some family stuff here.